Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight we travel to Lisbon, to a city that looks sunlit and peaceful from the Tagus, while quietly rehearsing for blood. Poirot and the Two Crowns follows Poirot and Hastings into the Praça do Comércio, on the eve of a royal procession where anonymous letters promise that the river remembers blood. 4 assassins are said to be waiting, and the line between security and theater is fatally thin. This is a story about what happens when the little gray cells are thrown into the path of a coup, and when murder is only the first move in a much larger game. As always, this tale is inspired by the spirit of Agatha Christie and the great Golden Age crime writers. But the plot, characters, and text you're about to hear are entirely our own creation. We've taken the echo of a real tragedy on the Lisbon waterfront and asked what it would look like if Poirot and Hastings were standing under those same arcades when history decided to change direction. This episode exists thanks to the listeners who support Nocturnal Tales on Patreon and on Buy Me a Coffee. These long, fully produced mysteries genuinely wouldn't be possible without you. So, thank you. If you'd like to help future stories like this come to life, you can join us on Patreon from $2.99 a month, or leave a one-off tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Now, settle in as the sun glitters on the Tagus. The crowds begin to gather and Poirot finds himself staring at 2 crowns that may not both survive the day. Chapter 1. The River, the Crown, and a Small Warning. It is an odd thing how a city can look as though it were built for peace, while quietly rehearsing for violence. Lisbon, seen from the river, is a vision made to lull the mind. Pale hills stacked with white houses, the red roofs like scattered playing cards, and the Tagus itself, broad, bright, almost insolently calm, carrying everything along as if politics were a nuisance it had decided to ignore. The sunlight that morning had the clean, hard quality of winter sun in the south. Not warm exactly, but brilliant enough to persuade you that trouble belongs to other countries and other seasons. Poirot naturally remained unconvinced. "You observe, Hastings," he said, peering through the window of our hired motor as we descended toward the Plaza do Mario, "that the air is too polite." I laughed. "Too polite? That's a new one." He turned his head slowly with that deliberate movement of his, as though even the muscles must be properly arranged, and looked at me with mild reproach. "I do not speak of manners. I speak of surfaces. The river, the fine facades, the bright uniforms, everything is made to say all is well. And when a thing insists too much, it is because it protests." "You've been in England too long," I told him. "We don't trust sunshine." "I trust the sunshine perfectly," said Poirot. "It is the men who stand in it that I do not trust. If this seems an uncharitable sentiment to begin a holiday with, you must understand that we were not precisely on holiday. We had come to Portugal at the invitation of a gentleman named Señor Duarte de Amaral, an attaché of the court, a man with excellent French, perfect gloves, and a look in the eyes that suggested he had not slept properly in a week. His letter, received at Whitehaven with a flourish of seals and discreet urgency, had requested Poirot's assistance in a matter of a private nature, touching the safety of persons of high consequence. It had not named those persons. One does not commit such things to paper. But even I, with my well-known tendency to miss the obvious, understood what was meant. Portugal, in our altered world, had returned to the crown after the Great War, patching itself together with that particular European trick of pretending the old symbols could be pasted back onto new wounds. A king, a prince, a court trying to look effortless again, factions in the cafes and clubs trying equally hard to look patient. It was not difficult to feel, even as a foreigner, that the city was balanced on a pin, and now the pin had begun to wobble. Our motor halted near the great open square by the river. The arcaded buildings stood in dignified formation, as if they had been drilled. Beyond them, the Tagus glittered, and on the far side the land rose in hazy brown folds. Signor Duarte awaited us at the entrance to a building that looked official enough to swallow a regiment. He bowed, kissed the air near Poirot's hand with continental precision, and offered me a firm shake. "Captain Hastings, Missy Pooh, I thank God you are here." Poirot's mustache twitched, an expression, in his case, as eloquent as any smile. "You thank God, yes," he murmured. "And also perhaps you will thank the punctuality of the trains. It is not always the same." Signor Duarte did not smile. He drew us inside quickly, as though the very square might be listening. "I will be frank," he said in French once we were in a corridor that smelled of polished wood and bureaucratic ink. "There is a threat, a credible threat. We have received warnings, 3 of them, each more specific than the last." Poirot removed his hat with fastidious care. "And the police?" Signor Duarte hesitated just long enough to tell me everything. "The police are divided. The army is attentive. The government is attempting calm. You understand, monsieur? The word loyalty is spoken very often here and very loudly. That is usually a sign it has begun to weaken." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "To whom is the threat directed?" Signor Duarte looked left and right, though there was no one within 10 paces. "To His Majesty and to the Prince." I felt for a moment that slight tightening behind the ribs one gets before bad news becomes a fact. Poirot, on the other hand, merely inclined his head as if we were discussing the possibility of rain. "And the nature of these warnings?" he asked. Signor Duarte produced an envelope from his inner pocket. It was plain, but the hand that held it was not. Poirot took it, opened it with the delicacy of a surgeon, and drew out 3 folded sheets. He read them silently. I watched his face, which at first remained composed. Then, very faintly, a displeasure settled over his features. Not surprise, but something closer to irritation, like a man discovering that a room he has just arranged has been disturbed. He handed the papers to me. The first was brief, a printed sentence cut from a newspaper and pasted onto a card. "The river remembers blood." The second was longer, typed, and signed with nothing at all. "On the day of the procession, the crown will be cut in 2. The father will fall, the son will follow, the city will become itself again." The third was worst of all because it was practical. "Terrero depart, noon. 2 shots for the king, 3 for the prince. Do not waste men looking for 1 assassin. There will be 4. I lowered the page slowly. "Good Lord," I said in English, because it came out before I could stop it. Poirot's eyes moved calm as ever to Signor Duarte. "You have shown these to whom?" "To no one outside the household," said Duarte. "To the king's secretary, to the commander of the guard, and now to you." "And the decision?" Poirot asked. Signor Duarte swallowed. "His Majesty will not cancel. He believes, he insists that if he cancels, he admits fear. He says the crown must be seen always." Poirot nodded once. "Ah, he is courageous." "Or proud," I muttered. Poirot glanced at me. "Often the same suit, Hastings. Only the buttons change." Signor Duarte leaned in. "Monsieur Poirot, tell me what to do. You are famous for seeing what others cannot." Poirot folded the papers neatly and returned them to the envelope. "We will do what must always be done," he said. "We will begin at the beginning. Who sent these? Who benefits? Who has the access? And who has the vanity to describe his crime in advance, as if it were theater?" Duarte's mouth tightened. "The Republicans. The Republicans," Poirot repeated politely as though tasting the word. "Yes, and also the Royalists, and also the men who sell weapons, and also the men who sell newspapers, and also the men who wish to be remembered. There are many who like an explosion, because it throws the dust into the air and hides their hands. We were shown, after a series of guarded doors and murmured passwords, into a smaller room with a view down toward the river. 2 soldiers stood like carved figures by the entrance. A third sat at a desk, pretending to read, but watching us with the careful indifference of a man who would not be surprised by murder. Poirot moved at once to the window and stood there, looking out at the square below. From this height, the Praça do Comércio looked like a stage. People crossed it in small clusters. A policeman strolled at ease. 2 women with baskets paused to talk. Beyond, the river shone like a blade. "You see," Poirot said softly, "how simple it is, Hastings. A wide open space, many lines of sight, many exits, and the most important men in the country will pass through it as if they were only going to church." I tried for once to be helpful rather than decorative. "But if we know the place and the time, Terreiro do Passo, surely the guard can be doubled." The route changed. Poirot shook his head. "You are English, mon ami. You believe in arrangements. Here the route is not merely a route, it is a symbol. The king will not change it because the meaning of the route is the very thing the assassin wishes to destroy." There was a knock at the door. One of the soldiers opened it and a man entered with a quick, controlled haste. Neat, dark-haired early 30s with the look of an official who has been forced into heroics by other people's decisions. "Senor Secretary," Duarte murmured and bowed. The man's gaze flicked to Pooh and then to me. "Monsieur Poirot," he said in French. "Captain Hastings, I am Almeida, Secretary to His Majesty. I am told you have come because you believe you can prevent what we cannot." Poirot's expression remained pleasant, but I knew him well enough to see that he was measuring. The man, as a Tor, measures cloth. "I have come," Poirot said, "because if there is to be a tragedy, I prefer not to applaud it." Almeida's jaw tightened. He was a man who did not enjoy foreign wit at a time like this. "You will attend the procession," Almeida said. "You will be near the royal party discreetly." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "Near enough to be shot, perhaps." Almeida's eyes did not flinch. "Near enough to see." Poirot's smile was faint. "Then I will do as I always do. I will see what is there and I will see what is not." It was decided in a low-voiced conference that made my skin itch that Poirot and I would take positions in the square, mixed among the dignitaries, but not so prominent as to draw attention. Duarte would remain close to the commander of the guard. Almeida would be in the royal carriage's second escort, close enough to be useful, not close enough to be blamed. As we left that building, the sunlight struck the square again, cheerful, dazzling, utterly indifferent. "Poirot," I said, keeping my voice low. "Are we truly going to stand there at noon and hope to catch 4 assassins with our bare hands?" He adjusted his tie with serene precision. "No," he said. "We will stand there at noon and observe the small things. The man who sweats in winter, the hand that keeps returning to the pocket, the eyes that do not look at the king because they are looking at the exits. And if we fail..." Poirot's mustache quivered. For a moment, he did not answer. Then he said very quietly, "If we fail, Hastings, the river will remember, and the city will not forgive." Below us, somewhere near the arcades, a church bell began to ring. It sounded to my ears less like an invitation to prayer than like a clock beginning to count down. And for the first time since we had arrived, I noticed something I had missed before. A small scrap of paper, white against the stone near the base of a column, fluttering in the wind as if trying to get someone's attention. Poirot stopped. He looked at it. "Hastings," he said, and there was iron in the softness of his voice. "We are late." "Late, but it's only morning." Poirot turned his head slightly, his eyes fixed on the square. Late, he repeated, because the first move has already been made. Chapter 2. The marker on the stone. Poirot did not hurry often. When he did, it was never by running. He crossed the square with that contained quickness of his. Short steps, shoulders level, the whole of him suggesting not panic, but decision. I followed, dodging a cart and two boys who were playing at soldiers with sticks. The scrap of paper lay where I had seen it, fluttering against the base of a column as though it wished to be found, and then forgotten. He crouched carefully, as if even the act of bending must be dignified, and examined the stone itself. His gloved finger traced something so small I would have sworn it was a trick of light. "A mark," he said. "A mark," I echoed, staring hard. "Where?" He pointed. "There. Just above the level of the paving was a faint line. Chalk, perhaps, or a scratch made to look like chalk. Beside it, a second, even fainter." "To you it is nothing," said Poirot. "To the man who needs to stand in exactly the right place, it is everything." He lifted the paper at last with two fingers, as though it might carry infection. It was not a message in the ordinary sense. No words, only a smear of something brownish at one corner, and a small punched hole near the edge. Pooh's eyes narrowed. "This is not dropped by accident," he murmured. "It is placed to be found to be used," said Poirot. "Not by us." He held it close to his nose very discreetly, then frowned. "Chocolate," I said with confidence. "Or tobacco." Pooh shot me a look of weary patience. "It is wax," he said. "Cheap wax from a seal or from a candle. And the whole, see, it is made by a pin. This paper was attached to something, a parcel, a packet, and then removed." He returned his gaze to the square, sweeping it with that calm, infuriating thoroughness of his. The arcades, the doors, the windows above, the flow of pedestrians. "Now," he said softly, "we ask who has reason to mark a spot, and who has reason to remove a label from a parcel in the open air." "A courier," I suggested. "A conspirator," he corrected. "A courier can be paid. A conspirator must be sure." He tucked the scrap into his pocketbook with careful delicacy. "We will do what every sensible man does when he wishes to learn the truth," said Poirot. "We will drink coffee." That is how it always begins with Poirot. The gravest matters approached with the domestic logic of a man who believes that the world reveals itself most honestly while pretending it is at ease. We chose a cafe under the arcades, small, noisy, crowded with men who spoke low and smoked high, and waiters who moved as though the entire building depended on their speed. From our table we could see the square and the river beyond. I confess, I had little appetite for coffee. My mind kept returning to those typed words. 2 shots for the king, 3 for the prince. Poirot naturally ordered something sweet. He sat with his back to the wall and his face to the room. I sat where I could see the square. Between us the little cups arrived, and with them the illusion of normality. Poirot watched. Not the obvious men, not the soldiers, not the officials. He watched the hands who held a cigarette too tightly, who tapped the table in a rhythm not their own, who kept looking at the door without knowing they did it. After 10 minutes he spoke without moving his lips much. The man by the third pillar, the one with the newspaper. I followed his gaze. A thin fellow in a cap pretending to read. The newspaper did not turn. His eyes moved. "Yes, but not down the page." "He's just loitering," I said. "Yes," said Poirot, "and he is loitering with purpose." The man stood abruptly, folded his paper with exaggerated calm, and wandered out. Poirot rose at once. "Pay," he said. I tossed coins on the table and followed him into the bright square. We did not rush. We did not stare. We did what Poirot called the art of being uninteresting, which for a man as neat as Poirot required considerable skill. The thin man drifted toward the riverside, then turned into a narrow street, then into a narrower one. Still the air changed there. Less river, more stone, less sunlight, more shadow. Shops appeared, small, cramped places selling nothing in particular. Strings, buttons, cheap books, candles. The thin man paused outside a printer's shop with a faded sign. He glanced around once, then slipped inside. Poirot did not follow immediately. He stopped at a stall where an old woman was selling oranges and examined the fruit with ridiculous intensity. "Printing," he said softly. "Always printing. The revolution begins on paper, Hastings. The gunshot is only the punctuation." A minute later, when the thin man had been swallowed long enough by the shop to give us an excuse, Poirot entered. The place smelled of ink and damp paper. A press sat, like a beast in the corner. Two men looked up, both with the practiced blandness of those who have learned to disguise suspicion as boredom. Poirot smiled as if he had come to order invitations for a christening. "Bonjour, monsieur," he said in French, then shifted into Portuguese so politely that it made me blush on his behalf. "I am told you are the best. I require printing. Very fine, very discreet." One of the men, heavy-jawed and tired-eyed, shrugged. "We print," he said. "What is it you want?" Pooh produced a card from his pocketbook, blank. "For a private gathering." He lied smoothly. Small, elegant black ink, a little border. The man took the card, looked at it, then at Poirot. "You are not Portuguese." "No," said Poirot. "That is why I come to those who are. It is always better." The heavy-jawed man's eyes flicked just once to the back room. Poirot saw it. I saw it too, though I confess it was only because Poirot had taught me where to look. "I have been recommended," Poirot continued as though nothing had happened, "by Signor d'Arte de Amaral." The air in the shop changed, not dramatically. No shouts, no drawn pistols, just a tightening like a net pulled a little closer. The man set down the card. "D'Arte," he repeated as if tasting it. "Many people have names." Poirot's smile did not alter. "Ah," he said. "Then perhaps I am mistaken. Perhaps I should go elsewhere." He turned as if to leave. And at that moment, from the back room a young apprentice appeared, no more than 16, with ink-stained fingers and frightened eyes. He carried a bundle of paper tied with twine. As he brushed past us, the bundle shifted and something slipped loose at the top. A small paper tag, punched with a pinhole, fell to the floor. Poirot's hand moved like a conjurer's. The tag vanished into his sleeve with such neatness that the boy did not even notice his loss. Poirot walked out at once, as if he had genuinely decided to take his business elsewhere. I followed, my heart pounding for the first time since the letters. We turned a corner and did not stop until we were out of sight of the shop. Poirot halted beneath a cracked plaster wall and drew out the tag. It was printed in block letters, a name, an address, and most chilling of all, a delivery time. Then below it in smaller type, "Velas doi unidades candles." "Candles," I repeated stupidly. Poirot's eyes were very calm. "Not candles," he said. "A disguise. Wax Hastings. Wax for seals. Wax for labels. Wax for bombs." I whispered and felt absurd for saying it. Poirot did not correct me this time. "Possibly," he said, "or for something else that requires wax and flame. But the time, 11:15, that is before noon, before the carriage arrives. They are placing something in the square while it is still only a square." I pictured it at once, a harmless bundle carried under an arcade, a boy with ink on his fingers, a parcel set down with the indifference of routine. And later, the king, the prince, the cheering, the flags, and whatever waited in the stone and shadow. Poirot folded the tag and returned it to his pocketbook. "We must tell Duarte and Almeida," I said. "At once." "Yes," said Poirot, "and the commander of the guard." "Yes." Pooh agreed again, but without enthusiasm. We hurried at last, truly hurried, back toward the official building by the square. Inside, the guards recognized Duarte's name and let us through after the kind of delay that exists, only to prove one has authority. We found Signor Duarte in a room that now felt less like an office and more like a sick room. Almeida was there too, leaning over a map of the square with red lines drawn across it. Both men looked up sharply as we entered. Poirot placed the tag on the table. Duarte read it, and something like despair crossed his face. "Candles," Almeida said flatly. "You think this is explosives. I think it is placement," said Poirot. "And I think your 4 assassins are not the whole story. A gunman needs courage. A bomb needs only patience." Almeida swore under his breath, an ugly human sound in that tidy room. "We will sweep the arcades," he said instantly. "We will search every parcel, every vendor." Poirot held up a hand. "You will do what you can," he said. "But you have a more serious difficulty." Duarte looked at him, eyes hollow. "What?" Poirot's voice softened, but it sharpened the words rather than blunting them. "Someone inside your circle is feeding them confidence." The letters were not only threats, they were performances. The writer enjoys being accurate, and accuracy requires knowledge. Almeida's face went rigid. "That is an accusation." "It is an observation," said Poirot. "Accusations come later." Duarte sank into a chair, his hands clasped tightly. "You do not understand," he said harshly. "If we begin to suspect one another, we collapse before they even strike." Poirot's eyes were steady. "And if you refuse to suspect one another," he said, "you collapse at noon." For a moment, none of us spoke. Outside, the city continued as if it had never heard of kings or bombs. A tram bell rang. Someone laughed. A gull cried over the river. Then Almeida straightened as though choosing the only path left. "Very well," he said. "We act. We sweep the arcades at 11. We double the guard. We station men on roofs. We close windows." Poirot nodded. "And we do one more thing," Poirot added. Almeida's jaw clenched. "What?" Poirot looked directly at him. "We prepare an exit for Captain Hastings and myself." Duarte stared. "An exit from the square." "From the country," said Poirot quietly. "Because if they succeed even once, Lisbon will not merely mourn. It will ignite. And in the fire, foreigners who stand too close to the crown will become convenient targets." Almeida opened his mouth to protest. And then somewhere down the corridor there came a sudden commotion. Boots, shouts. A door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. A young officer burst in, white-faced. "Senor Almeida, Senor Duarte. There is a crowd forming near Rocio. They are shouting. Someone has been arrested. One of ours. They say they claim the palace plans to kill civilians to justify martial law." Duarte rose so fast his chair toppled. "That's absurd." The officer's voice shook. "They believe it." Poirot did not move. He only looked at us, and in his eyes I saw something I had rarely seen there. Something like pity. "The second move," he said softly, "has been made." Chapter 3. Leaflets, candles, and the crowd. The noise at Rocio was the sort of noise that pretends to be spontaneous. It begins with a few voices, then a few more, then the sudden miracle of 100 people all apparently arriving at the same conclusion, at the same time. A man climbs a step. Another man appears with papers. A third produces a whistle. Respectable citizens pause only for a moment. And that moment becomes a crowd. Almeida's young officer had barely finished his report when Almeida was already issuing clipped orders. Men to Rocio, men to the arcades, riders to the palace, messengers everywhere. It was the sensible response of a sensible man. Poirot watched him for a moment, then said quietly, "If you pull your strongest men away from Terrarero do Pacho, you do the work for them." Almeida's face tightened. If Rocio becomes a riot, the city will be ungovernable. It will be ungovernable anyway, Poirot replied, mild as milk. But the question is when. Duarte looked as though he might be sick. We can't ignore it, he whispered. If civilians die, Poirot nodded once. Just so. Therefore we do not ignore it. We read it. Almeida stared. Read it like a letter, said Poirot. It is only ink and timing. He turned to me. Hastings, you will come. I should like to record that at this point I protested purely on the grounds that I am a retired officer and not a particularly eager target for revolutionary bullets. In truth, I did nothing of the sort. When Poirot says you will come, one finds oneself already moving. We left Almeida to his maps and his guards and drove toward Rocio in a smaller motor. Duarte perched beside the driver like a man afraid of being seen with his own thoughts. The streets tightened as we went. Older stone, narrower lanes, balconies close enough to lean and speak across. Laundry hung between buildings like improvised banners. Men stood in doorways and watched us pass with the still flat attention of cats. Not curiosity, but appraisal. Rocio itself, broad, patented underfoot, and built with the permanent confidence of a square that has seen every kind of speech and bloodshed, was already filling. It had the unmistakable feeling of a place becoming a crowd, rather than a crowd merely occupying a place. There were shouts, yes, but not yet the sort that break glass. A woman cried out that her brother had been arrested. A man declared that the palace intended to shoot civilians to justify the bayonets. Someone started a patriotic refrain, and others joined in without knowing all the words. The cheering came in bursts, real enough to be alarming, but uneven, as though it were being prompted. Poirot did not study faces. He studied flow. Where the noise began, where it was repeated, how it traveled like a message passed along a line. Do you see, Hastings? He murmured. The crowd is angry. Yes, but it is also guided. Observe where the sound begins. Observe who repeats it. I saw very little beyond the blunt fact that there were more bodies than I liked, and that several of those bodies carried stout sticks with an air of having brought them for a purpose. Then I noticed the paper. Leaflets, dozens, were being passed hand to hand, fluttering down to the pavement, trampled, snatched up again. A boy ran through the press of people distributing them with the grim importance of a child playing soldier, but with none of a child's playfulness. Poirot caught one neatly as it spun past as though the thing had been intended for his hand. He held it up. In bold Portuguese, it accused the king of preparing to bathe the square in blood in order to secure his throne. It spoke of loyal regiments and false provocations, and it ended with a simple instruction that turned my stomach with its calm certainty. Gather at noon. Let the people be seen. Poirot's eyes moved over it once, then his nostrils flared faintly. This ink, he said softly. It is cheap. It bleeds. I glanced at the page and in my impatience dismissed it. Ink is ink. Poirot gave me the look he reserves for my most faithful stupidity. No, Hastings. Ink is always a signature. He indicated the lower edge where a thin black line had smudged as though a roller had dragged slightly. A faulty roller, he said. A printer who does not maintain his machine. And the spacing, look at the R in Rocio, slightly high, like the tag from our candles. My scalp prickled. The same shop. Yes, said Poirot, and was about to continue when he stopped himself and nodded almost imperceptibly toward a man near the fountain. The fellow looked respectable to the point of parody. Respectable coat, respectable hat, respectable mustache that seemed purchased rather than earned. He spoke quietly to a small cluster of men, then moved on, then spoke again. His hands stayed in his pockets. His eyes never settled anywhere long enough to be caught. "The conductor," Poirot murmured. "Not the singer. The conductor." He began edging through the crowd with the patience of a man navigating a drawing room. I followed as best I could, apologizing in 3 languages to shoulders and elbows. Twice my boot was trodden on. Once a woman jabbed me sharply with a basket. Poirot never lost the line of his quarry for an instant. The respectable mustache man drifted away from the densest knot of bodies and slipped into a side street. Poirot followed at a distance, close enough to keep him far enough to be forgettable. The street narrowed into shadow. A tram bell clanged in the distance with a cheerfulness that felt like mockery. Halfway down, the man paused beside a doorway and spoke to someone inside. I could not see the other person clearly, only a sleeve, a hand, and the brief glint of a pin. Poirot stopped. He listened. I listened too, but heard only murmurs. Pooh leaned a fraction closer and I saw his eyes sharpen, those famous little gray cells marching into formation. A phrase floated out, suddenly clear. "Arcade Norte 11 and A4 third pillar." Poirot's hand closed on my sleeve, not to restrain any heroic nonsense. I had learned in bitter experience that charging like a bull is a fine way to be killed without improving matters, but to steady himself as he shifted his angle of sight. The mustache man stepped back into the street, adjusted his hat, and continued on. Poirot followed for 10 paces, then stopped abruptly and turned into a small shop, as though seized by a sudden desire to purchase string. Inside, a startled old man blinked at us over a counter. Pooh smiled charmingly, said something rapid in Portuguese that I did not catch, and bought, of all things, a spool of twine. We came out again just in time to see the mustache man turn another corner. Poirot did not follow. Instead, he looked to Duarte, who had managed to keep up, though his face had gone the color of old paper. "You heard?" Poirot asked. Duarte nodded, helpless. "Then you will tell Almeida," Poirot said briskly. "Now, Arcade Norte, third pillar, 11:15. Duarte hesitated. "And you?" "I will go where Almeida cannot," said Poirot, "to the place where instructions are given." Before I could ask what he meant, Poirot was already moving again. This time not after the mustache man, but back into the heart of Rosio. He approached the boy distributing leaflets. The child's eyes flicked over Poirot, foreign, compact, too neat, and he tried to dart away. Pooh's hand touched his sleeve. Not rough, barely even visible, but firm enough to hold a frightened boy in place. "Mati," Poirot said gently in French, then shifted into Portuguese with surprising softness. "You are very busy. It is hard work. Yes. Where do you fetch so? Many papers?" The boy stared wide-eyed and said nothing. Poirot produced a coin and let it gleam between his fingers. The boy's gaze locked on it as if it were a magnet. Poirot smiled. "I do not wish to get you in trouble. I am only curious. Curiosity is not a crime." The boy swallowed, then jerked his chin toward a street leading away from Rocio, toward the older quarter where the printer's shop lay. Pooh let the coin drop into his palm and released him. "There," Poirot said to me. "Now we know where the ink flows from. Let us see who drinks it." We did not march straight back to the printer's shop. Poirot took a looping route. 2 streets over, past a bakery beneath a line of shirts drying in the thin winter sun, then stopped where we could watch the printer's doorway without being noticed ourselves. A delivery cart stood nearby. An apprentice with ink-stained fingers carried bundles in and out. Another boy hovered, waiting for instructions like a small dog. Then the mustache man appeared. He spoke to the heavy-jawed printer for only a moment, then disappeared into the back room. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "He is not merely a customer," he murmured. "He is management." "How do we get him?" I whispered. Pooh glanced at me with mild amusement. We do not get him, Hastings. We let him lead us. Almost at once the back door opened, and a man slipped out carrying a wooden box. On the box I saw a paper tag fastened by a pin. Poirot's expression altered by a degree. Not fear, not excitement, but the quiet satisfaction of a man watching a locked mechanism click into place. "There," he said. "Our candles." The courier walked quickly, eyes forward, refusing to look left or right. Poirot followed at a distance. I followed Poirot because that is what one does when the alternative is to stand still and pretend one is not frightened. The courier turned toward the river streets and slowed near a set of arcades that would bring him back toward Terreiro d'Asso. Poirot stopped behind a column and watched. The courier put the box down briefly as if shifting his grip. In that heartbeat of pause, a second man, cap low, shoulders hunched, came close, brushed the box with his foot, and moved on without breaking stride. To an innocent eye, it was nothing more than jostling in a narrow street. To Poirot, it was the entire machinery of the plot revealed in miniature. "The pass," Poirot murmured. "Not a delivery at all, a handoff." He stepped out decisively straight into the courier's path. "Pardon me," Poirot said in Portuguese, too polite to sound dangerous. "You have dropped something." The courier blinked, his eyes darted. His hand tightened on the box. Pooh's voice remained mild. "It is only a tag." The courier's breathing changed. Quick, shallow, and the decision in him snapped like a twig. He ran. I ran after him because I'm English and pride is sometimes stronger than sense. It was not dignified. I knocked into a barrel. I startled a dog. I very nearly went over my own feet. The courier was quicker than he looked. Poirot did not run at all. He simply stepped sideways as though he had known the line of flight in advance. A man in a dark coat, one of Duarte's guards, positioned earlier by Poirot with that quiet certainty of his, moved out of a doorway and blocked the courier's path. The courier skidded, tried to turn, and collided with me. We went down together in a tangle of limbs in the wooden box. Something inside clinked, not the dull thud of wax candles, but the sharp, telling chime of metal. The courier struggled wildly. I held on with more enthusiasm than technique. Poirot arrived, breathing quite normally, and knelt beside the spilled box. He lifted one of the candles. It was wax, perfectly shaped, but too light. His fingers pressed gently, and the wax gave, revealing the hollow core and nestled inside it, brass cartridges. "Ammunition," I said hoarsely, and felt my mouth go dry. Poirot nodded. "For pistols, for rifles, for whatever will speak at noon." He looked at the courier, who had gone oddly still now that the trick was exposed. "Tell me," Poirot said softly, "how many boxes like this?" The courier's lips trembled. Pooh's voice hardened by a degree. Not louder, not angrier, simply absolute. "How many?" The courier swallowed. "4. Poirot's eyes flicked to me. "4 assassins," he said quietly. "And 4 boxes, each to be collected at the arcades." He stood and turned to Duarte's guard. "Take him not to the police station, to Almeida." Now the guard hauled the courier up. I got to my feet, dusted myself by habit, and tried to reclaim my breath. Poirot was already looking past us toward the square, his gaze traveling upward to the windows and balconies lining the route like theater boxes. "What now?" I managed. Poirot did not answer at once. Then very quietly he said, "Now we learn whether the candles are the crime or only the distraction." A bell began to ring in the distance, closer and heavier than Rossio's, the sound of a city approaching noon. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Come, Hastings," he said. "If we are to save 2 lives, we must arrive at the moment when everyone else believes the danger has already been handled." As we moved back toward Terreiro d'Asso, fast, now purposeful, I caught sight on the edge of the street of a fresh chalk mark on the stone, pale against the paving. It had not been there before. It had been placed while we were away by someone who knew exactly where the king would pass. If you've stayed with us this far, you're our kind of listener. And if you'd like more of these mysteries without waiting, there is a private door you can step through. On Patreon, we publish 4 stories every week. Here on YouTube, you receive 2, and they arrive a couple of days later. So, while this case unfolds here, our patrons are already ahead, already turning the next page, already stepping into the next drawing room, the next corridor, the next locked door. And because Patreon receives double the weekly stories, not every case ever leaves that private archive. Some mysteries are kept Patreon exclusive, filed away where only members can hear them. If you've missed them, 3 recent examples are waiting behind that door. Miss Marple and the Holly Wreath Murder. A Christmas house party where the holly itself becomes a warning and goodwill is used as camouflage. Poirot. The Christmas Eve Silence. A London tobacconist. A scene staged to look simple and a silence that was purchased for a reason. Veronica Lakewood. New Year's Eve. Jazz-age Chicago at midnight, where champagne hides calculation and the most dangerous people never raise their voices. On Patreon, you can choose your door. Early Access Explorer for ad-free listening and early access. The writing table to vote on themes and see the behind-the-scenes notes. The Archive Society for quarterly ebook anthologies. The mystery patron to submit ideas, or the private commission case for a fully custom story. If you want the extra cases, the early access, and the stories that never come to YouTube, Patreon is where they live. Chapter 4. Noon in the Square. If you have never watched a city decide all at once to change its mind about its rulers, I do not recommend the experience. One feels quite suddenly that the pavement is no longer merely stone, but a kind of skin, sensitive, alive, and ready to bruise. From the arcades we could hear the sound of Rossio moving toward us. Not a single roar, but a swelling, many-throated insistence, like surf that has discovered it can climb. Almeida issued orders with clipped precision, detachments to hold the approaches, riflemen to the roofs, mounted men to keep the carriage line clear. His voice remained steady, but his eyes had acquired a brightness that was not courage so much as strain. Poe, by contrast, looked almost bored. Only I knew that this boredom was a mask he wore when his mind was working at its fiercest. "Almeida," he said quietly. "Who has the authority to assign rooms in the buildings above? The arcades?" Almeida's jaw tightened. "The municipality in practice, agents, clerks, caretakers." "Why?" "Because a man does not fire from a window he has not secured," said Poirot, "and he does not secure it without help, or money, or permission." Almeida made a sharp gesture to an officer. "Go now. Check the caretaker lists, any rooms rented recently, any shutters that have been repaired, any complaints of strangers." The officer ran. Pooh did not look reassured. He looked as though he had moved one piece on a board and found the board was larger than expected. Duarte returned at a near trot, his coat unbuttoned, his face drawn. "The palace is sending word," he said. "His Majesty departs within minutes. They will not delay." Almeida swore under his breath. They should be in an armored coach and they should go by the back streets. Duarte gave a bleak shake of the head. "The king refuses. The prince is with him." Poirot's mustache twitched in that tiny private way of his. "Then we will do what we can with what we are given." He turned to me. "Hastings, you will stay on the edge of the square, not under the windows, not close to the carriage, close enough to see, far enough to breathe." "I don't like breathing when you talk like that," I muttered. Poirot's eyes held mine. "You will do as I ask." It was not a request. It was the tone he used when he had already accepted the worst, and was trying at least to save what could still be saved. Before I could answer, a fresh commotion broke near the far end of the arcade. A small group of municipal men, led by the very officer Almeida had dispatched, came hurrying toward us. One of them carried a ring of keys so large it might have belonged to a jailer. Almeida seized him. Well, the municipal man spoke rapidly in Portuguese. Duarte translated, his voice thin with disbelief. 2 rooms rented last week, paid in cash. A French name, perhaps false. The caretaker thought it was an artist, a photographer. They insisted on the best view of the square. Poirot nodded once as if hearing the final note of a tune he already knew. "Show me," he said. Almeida hesitated. "You cannot." "I can," Poirot cut in softly. "Because you have minutes, and your men will do exactly what they are trained to do. They will search for weapons. I will search for the mind." Almeida's nostrils flared, but he waved a hand. "Take 2 guards quickly." We moved into the stairwell entrance I had used earlier. The same damp stone smell, the same narrow ascent. But now there were boots behind us, and a sense that the building itself was listening. On the landing, the caretaker fumbled with keys, his hands shaking. Poirot leaned close. "Did your photographer bring equipment?" Yes, the man whispered. "A heavy case tripod. He paid extra for quiet, and he asked about the procession." Poirot's voice was almost kind. The caretaker swallowed. Only the time. The exact time." Poirot nodded. "Of course." The key turned. The door opened. The room beyond was bare enough to be plausible. A table, 2 chairs, a cloth draped over something near the window, a camera case in the corner. Sunlight cut through the slats of the shutters in bright stripes. Dust floated in the beam. It looked at first glance like nothing. Then Poirot crossed the room and lifted the cloth. Beneath it was not a camera at all, but a small, ugly contraption of metal and wood, a rifle rigged with a rest and a crude sighting device aligned precisely to the window gap. Almeida's guard drew in breath sharply. Madre Deus did not touch the weapon. He simply examined the floor near the window. There, faint but unmistakable, was chalk dust, the same pale residue as the marks below. "A geometry," Poirot murmured. "They did not mark the ground for the courier. They marked it for the bullet." He stepped to the camera case and opened it with a practiced hand. Inside were plates and lenses, yes, but also a false bottom. He lifted it and revealed a small box containing cartridges of a different sort than the ones we had seized. Longer, heavier, meant for a rifle rather than a pistol. Almeida's face went hard. "We found the nest. Good. We remove it. We win." Pooh looked up at him. "No," he said softly. "Now we discover if the bird has already flown." He moved to the window and peered through the narrow opening between shutter and frame. From there the square lay exposed like a diagram. The arcades below formed clean lines. The carriage route was obvious. The chalk marks on the paving seen from above made perfect sense, like a child's lesson in angles. Poirot exhaled very quietly. Too perfect. Almeida stared. "What do you mean?" Poirot turned his head slightly, listening. Below us, the crowd's sound surged nearer. Somewhere in the distance, a cheer went up, sharp, sudden. "They are arriving," Duarte said hoarsely. Poirot closed the camera case with a decisive click. "We go down now." We descended faster than dignity would normally allow. At the bottom, the square had changed again in our absence. The approaches were clogged with bodies, banners and leaflets fluttered. The guards were now less aligned than a series of human dams. And above it all, like the first crack of thunder, came the noise of the crowd receiving its moment. The royal carriage entered the Praça do Maio at last. It was a handsome thing. Polished, dark body, bright fittings, escorting horsemen, the sort of vehicle built to reassure a nation that order exists. The king sat upright, unmistakable even at a distance, a man determined to appear invulnerable. Beside him, the prince leaned forward slightly, younger, alert, with that mixture of confidence and unease that belongs to heirs who understand they are being watched. From the arcade shade, I could see faces turn. Some cheered, some jeered, most simply stared. The square held its breath in a way that made my skin prickle. Poirot stood very still, his eyes not on the carriage, but on the crowd line, on the windows, on the little gaps where a man might stand unseen, for half a second. "A stings," he said without looking at me. "Do you see the man with the camera?" I blinked, scanning. There were photographers, of course, journalists, amateurs, men who lived by selling images of other men's glory. "Which one?" "The one who does not take photographs," Poirot said. And then I saw him. Near the edge of the crowd, not far from the third pillar line, a man held a camera at chest height. But he was not angling it toward the king. He was angling it slightly aside as though framing something else. His hands were too steady, his shoulders too relaxed. Poirot moved, not quickly, but with purpose, threading toward him through the shaded corridor of the arcade. I went after him, my mouth dry. The man lifted the camera. The carriage rolled forward, the horses stepping high, the guard line tightening. Poirot was 3 paces away when the first shot cracked. It did not come from above. It came from the crowd, close and flat, like a slap. The king jerked, an ugly, involuntary movement, then stiffened as if trying to command his own body back into obedience. A second shot followed immediately. The prince half rose, turning toward his father, his face suddenly stripped of ceremony. Then the world split open. More shots, rapid overlapping screams, horses rearing, the escort surging inward, blades flashing, the crowd heaving in 2 directions at once, some pressing forward in horror or rage, others breaking backward as if the air itself had turned to fire. Poirot reached the cameraman as the man tried to step away. Poirot's hand shot out and caught his wrist. There was a brief, vicious struggle, small, contained, terrible. The camera was not a camera at all, but a hollowed housing for a pistol mechanism, a trick designed to hide the hand until the last instant. Poirot wrenched it sideways, breaking the man's line. But the work had been done. The prince slumped, then collapsed sideways against the carriage edge. The king sagged forward, one hand still gripping the rail as though refusing to let go of the nation itself. A guard tried to climb onto the wheel shouting and was dragged down by the crush. Poirot's face, for the first time since Lisbon, showed naked anger, not at the violence, but at the wasteful stupidity of men who believed history could be rewritten with bullets. "Hastings!" he shouted. I forced my way toward him, half blind with shock. Poirot thrust the disguised weapon into my hands. "Give this to Almia now." I turned and nearly went down as the crowd surged. The square had become a living thing, trampling itself. I saw Almeida fighting his way toward the carriage, shouting orders that vanished in the noise. Darte was nowhere, swallowed perhaps by the escort. And then, like a curtain dropping, the rumor became reality. Someone screamed, not in grief, but in triumph. One of those sharp, ecstatic cries that signal a mob has found its story. The king is dead. The words traveled faster than truth ever does. They leapt from mouth to mouth, and with them came something else. A sudden collective permission. Men began tearing at the guard line. Women sobbed and clutched children. A bottle smashed. A stone flew. Chapter 5. Noon in the square. Poirot did not drag me toward the river as a man drags another out of danger. He propelled me as one drives a reluctant cart, with the brutal certainty that if you stop to argue about dignity, you will be crushed beneath it. We moved under the arcades where the air was cooler and the light less blinding. But the noise followed. Screams, hooves, orders, prayers, and the thick animal roar of a crowd discovering it has power. At the edge of the square, a knot of men surged toward us. Not soldiers, but civilians, faces distorted by fear and exhilaration, mouths open in slogans they had not been using 10 minutes before. One of them pointed, and I knew with sick clarity how quickly a story becomes a verdict. In their eyes, Poirot was not the man who had tried to stop a murder. He was the foreigner who had been close enough to be suspicious. Poirot kept his head down and his pace steady. "Do not look back," he said. "You cannot help them by watching." We reached the river steps at last, stone worn smooth, slick in places with spray and age. The Tagus lay bright and wide, almost insulting in its calmness, carrying small boats as though they were toys and history were a rumor. Poirot scanned the water and then the line of warehouses and moorings, his gaze quick and precise. "There," he said, a small launch waited half-hidden beside a piling, its engine idling low. A man in a cap sat at the stern, pretending to mend a rope. He looked up once, saw Poirot, and gave the tiniest nod. As we hurried down, a shape detached itself from the shadow of a column above. Duarte, coat torn, cheeks strewy with blood, eyes shining with shock. "Thank God," he breathed. "You are alive." Poirot did not waste time with thanks. "Almeida." Duarte's mouth worked as though the words were stones. "He is at the square." He tried to reach the carriage. They struck him. "His head. He is not dead." But Duarte swallowed. The escort pulled the bodies away. "I do not know where." "The prince." He could not finish. Poirot's face tightened, but his voice stayed controlled. "Then it begins." D'Artagnan stared at him. "Begins." Poirot gestured toward the city behind us. The chant had gathered shape now. It rolled down the streets and over the square in waves. The same voices that had shouted against bayonets were now shouting against the crown itself with a certainty that had clearly been rehearsed. This was never only murder. Pooh said it is the signal for the change of regime. The death is the match, the city is the powder. From above the steps came the of boots and the sharper sound of someone shouting an order. Duarte flinched. "They will arrest everyone," he said hoarsely, "or the crowd will tear them apart first. You must go now." Pooh took Duarte by the sleeve, not unkindly, but firmly. "Listen to me. Who typed the letters?" Duarte blinked as if he had not understood the question. "What the warnings?" Poirot said the second and third. "The typewriter. Whose machine?" Duarte's eyes flicked away. "They were delivered to the household." "There are clerks, many hands. It is impossible." "It is not impossible." Poirot cut in softly. "It is merely unpleasant." Duarte's throat bobbed. "If you are saying, I am saying nothing yet," Poirot replied. "I am remembering." He turned and stepped into the launch without hesitation. The boatman rose, and in the movement, I saw the glint of a small pistol at his belt, and the stiff posture of a man who had served somewhere official. Poirot spoke to him briefly in French. The man nodded, untied the rope, and pushed off. I looked back because I am incapable of obeying the sensible instruction not to. The arcades above us were crowded now with running figures, some in uniform, some not. A stone splashed into the river behind the launch, then another, thrown too late and too wildly to strike. Behind us the square boiled. Smoke rose from somewhere near the arcades. Perhaps a flare, perhaps something worse. The chant thickened, and with it came a sound I had never heard in England, outside of a battlefield. The sudden, irregular crack of rifles fired without formation. Poirot sat very still, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed not on the city, but on the line of rooftops, as though he were reading them like a map. Where are we going? I asked. The South Bank first, said Poirot. Then to the train, then out. Dates stared at him. Spain. Spain. Poirot agreed. And then wherever the world still pretends it is stable. A shout rose from the waterfront as we passed. Men pointing, fists raised, a few running along the quay as though they could outrun water. Then the distance widened and the river swallowed them. Only when the city was a little farther away did Pooh speak again, quietly as if to himself. They gave us candles to catch, he murmured, so that we would applaud ourselves for preventing the obvious, and so that the true weapon could remain close enough to feel the warmth of the crowd. Dwart's voice shook. You mean you could not have stopped it? Poirot turned his head, and there was no gentleness now, only a blunt honesty that felt like a slap. I could have, he said, if the king had allowed the simplest precaution, a change of route, a closed carriage, a refusal of theater. But he preferred to be seen as brave, and the assassins required only that he be seen. Dwart covered his face with his hands. My country. Poirot's voice softened by a fraction. Your country will live. It will simply have a different face in the mirror. The launch touched the South Bank at a quieter stretch, where warehouses crouched low, and men kept their eyes on their own business. The boatman led us along a back lane to a waiting motor. The driver did not ask questions. He had the look of a man paid not for loyalty, but for silence. As we drove away, the sound of Lisbon's upheaval followed us like distant thunder. Once on a rise, I saw the city spread out, white and beautiful, and suddenly unfamiliar, as though it belonged to a different century. A plume of smoke rose near the center, and my stomach turned. Poole beside me adjusted his cuffs with trembling fingers that betrayed him for the first time. We go, he said very softly, because if we stay, we will be used by the old regime to prove foreign plots, or by the new regime to prove foreign guilt. Either way, we become evidence rather than men. D'Artait's voice was barely audible. And the truth, Poirot's eyes remained forward. The truth, he said, will have to travel with us. Chapter 6. A border, a typewriter, and the price of martyrdom. We left Portugal as one leaves a burning house quickly with the shameful awareness that others are still inside. The train eastward was crowded with people who pretended they were merely traveling. Their faces gave them away. A woman clutched a bird cage as though it contained her last certainty. A man in a clean suit stared at his hands as if trying to remember what he had done with them yesterday. At one stop, a group of soldiers boarded, rifles slung carelessly, and the carriage fell silent in that particular way. Silence falls when fear has been instructed. Dwart traveled with us as far as the border, sitting rigidly and answering questions only when necessary. Poirot, for his part, was unusually quiet. When he did speak, it was to ask small, practical things, times, stations, names, collecting facts, as he always did, building a structure in his mind that could support the weight of the day. It was only near the frontier, when the train had slowed and the landscape had become harsher, that Poirot finally turned to me. Hastings, he said, you are thinking that we have failed. I am thinking, I said carefully, that 2 men are dead and a country is coming apart, and we are in a train compartment as helpless as children. Poirot nodded once. Yes, that is the feeling. Now, let us apply the brain to it. Duarte let out a bitter sound. What is there to apply? They shot them. That is all. Poirot looked at him. No, that is not all. If it were only murder, it would have been done in a dark street with less risk. They chose noon and the square and the most public route because they did not want a death. They wanted a transformation. Duarte stared out the window. The Republicans. Poirot agreed. And also the men who wanted the king to become a martyr, and the men who wanted to be heroes of the new order. These circles overlap Dart. Often they are the same men wearing different hats. He took out his pocketbook and with the neatness of a man laying out surgical instruments produced the wax-smeared scrap, the pinholed tag, and finally a folded leaflet he had kept. "You remember what I asked you at the river steps?" Poirot said. "Who typed the letters?" Dwart's jaw tightened. "I told you many hands." Poirot's eyes did not leave him. And yet the letters contain details that require a hand very near the court. The exact timing, the composition of the escort, the certainty that the king would refuse to cancel. That is not knowledge gathered in a cafe. Dwart's voice turned raw. "You are accusing my household." "I am accusing a machine," Poirot said. "A typewriter, the same one used for official lists." Dwart flinched. "Impossible." Poirot's tone remained almost gentle. "Not impossible, merely dreadful." He leaned back and began, as he so often did, to tell the story in the correct order, reassembling the chaos until it looked like a design. The leaflets came from the cheap printer. Yes, their purpose was to move the crowd and to frame the narrative. The palace will shoot civilians, gather at noon, be seen. That ensured bodies in the square, anger in the air, and confusion for the guards. The candles were ammunition caches, not primarily to kill the king, but to arm the square for the second act. It is easier to topple an old regime when every street corner can crack like a battlefield. Dwart whispered. "And the rifle room?" "A prop," Poirot said. "A very clever prop. A room rented under a false name with the correct view. A photographer's story to soothe the caretaker. A tripod case to make it plausible and inside a rig. Why? To pull the guard's attention upward, to make Almeida feel he had located the nest, to tempt him into saying, 'We have won.'" I swallowed. But the shots did not come from above. "No," said Poirot. "They came from the crowd, close, fast, brutal. A pistol disguised in a camera housing so that the hand was hidden until the last instant. The chalk marks aligned the killer's position and the carriage's pause. That is why the marks kept reappearing. They were not directions for a courier. They were corrections for a geometry." Dwart's hands clenched. "Then why send letters at all?" Poirot's mouth tightened. "Because the letters were not warnings. They were theater. They were written by someone who enjoyed the sense of being the author of history." A long silence followed. The train rattled on. Outside, the border posts began to appear in the distance like teeth. Then Poirot said the thing that even now makes my skin go cold. The man who typed the letters did not necessarily pull the trigger, but he ensured the trigger would be pulled at the right moment and with the correct protection. Dottie's voice was hoarse. "Who?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He looked at the leaflet again, then at the tag, then at the wax smear. "The wax," he said softly, almost to himself. "Cheap wax. A seal, yes. And in your office, Dwart, who seals the outgoing dispatches? Who handles the municipal permissions? Who knows which caretaker can be persuaded, which clear can be bribed, which guard can be moved with a whisper?" Dart's eyes widened slowly, as though something in his mind were trying to refuse what it already knew. Poirot said it plainly. "Your deputy secretary, Signor Pimentel." Duarte made a strangled sound. "Pimentel?" "No, he is loyal. He has served the court 10 years. Poirot's gaze was steady. "Yes. And he is the man who would be trusted with the typewriter, the seals, the lists, the quiet errands. He is also the man who would not be watched because everyone assumes that the traitor must be dramatic. They always imagine a conspirator as a romantic, but the true conspirator is often a clear." Dartat's face drained of color. "You have no proof." Poirot nodded. Not the sort that survives a revolution. The new regime will not care. The old regime is dead. Justice has become a luxury item. He leaned forward. But you can test it if you live long enough to return. Ask for the typewriter ribbons. Compare the spacing of the letters, especially the R. Look for the faulty roller line. Ask who approved the room rental. Ask who knew the route would not change. And then watch what Pimentel does when you ask. The guilty man will not argue. He will vanish. Dwart stared at his hands, as if they no longer belonged to him. If you are right, then I brought you here for nothing. Poirot's voice softened, but it did not comfort. You brought me because you wished to do the correct thing. That is not a crime. Your error was the old one, believing that loyalty is equality rather than a disguise. The train slowed. We had reached the border station. Soldiers in a different uniform moved along the platform. Papers were demanded. Names were checked. For a moment it seemed absurd that bureaucracy should survive when kingdoms do not. Our documents arranged as Poirot had insisted before the procession held. Duarte's did as well, though he looked like a man walking in a dream. When at last we were through, and the train lurched forward into Spain, Duarte let out a long breath and turned to Poirot. What will you do now? Poirot looked out of the window at the dry ground and the hard light. What I always do, he said quietly. I will remember. And when memory can be used without killing the wrong people, I will speak. Duarte nodded once as though accepting a sentence. I will go back. You may die, I said bluntly. Duarte's mouth tightened. Yes. Poirot watched him for a moment. Then very softly he said, if you go back, do not try to be brave. Bravery is how kings get killed. Be cautious. Be boring. Be alive. At the next stop, Duarte left us, stepping down onto the platform with the air of a man walking toward his own funeral. The train moved on and carried him out of sight. For a time, Poirot said nothing. Then he reached into his pocket and with a faint tremor, straightened the corner of his handkerchief, as though restoring order to something he could still control. Hastings, he said at last. You see now why I dislike theater. I stared at the passing landscape, feeling older than I had been that morning. Yes, I said, because the audience always pays whether they wanted a ticket or not. Poirot's mustache twitched, not with amusement, but with a kind of weary approval. Exactly, he said. And today, my friend, Portugal paid for a performance it did not write. We traveled on toward safety, if safety is the right word for any place after you have watched history crack like glass. Behind us, the Tagus continued to flow, bright and indifferent, and the city by the river began learning a new name for itself. Some of you have asked if there's another way to support us right now. There is one we'd like to share, and it's something my wife and I created together. Alongside Nocturnal Tales, we wrote a children's book called Sherlock Paws and the Diamond of the Nile, available on Amazon. It's a classic detective story reimagined for younger readers with one important twist. Sherlock Holmes is a dog. In this story, Sherlock Poirot and his loyal companion, Dr. Spot, set off on an adventure to Egypt, where a valuable diamond has vanished. With noses twitching and tails wagging, they rely on observation, logic, and attention to detail to uncover the truth. It's a mystery full of friendship, travel, and discovery. Adventurous, but always warm and age-appropriate. The goal of the book is simple, to introduce children to detective thinking in a way that feels playful and engaging. Instead of noise and spectacle, the story rewards curiosity. Children are encouraged to notice clues, think things through, and enjoy how small details matter, just as they do in classic mysteries. If you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or young readers in your family, This is a story we genuinely believe they might enjoy. And if you're looking for a way to support our work during this difficult period, purchasing the book helps us directly while giving something tangible, thoughtful, and fun in return. As always, there's no obligation. We simply wanted to share something we made together with the same care we put into everything else. The link is in the description. And thank you truly for being here. Epilogue. A note on the true history. Dear friends, before we close this file, a brief word on what truly happened in Lisbon and what we deliberately moved, reshaped, and dramatized for our story. In real history, the event that inspired our Two Crowns tragedy is the Lisbon Riocide. On 1st February 1908 in Terreiro do Pacho, today's Praça do Ocio, King Carlos I of Portugal and his heir Prince Luís Felipe were shot in public as the royal party crossed the square by the Tagus. The attack is most often associated with Alfredo Luís de Costa and Manuel Buissa, linked to revolutionary Republican networks. Queen Amilé and the young Infante Manuel survived, and Manuel became King Manuel II. The monarchy did not fall that same day, but it never recovered its footing. In October 1910, the 5th of October Revolution overthrew the Portuguese monarchy and proclaimed the Republic, and Manuel II fled into exile in England. Our tale shifts the timing into the early 1920s and places Hastings in the path of the shockwave. Not because we wish to improve history, but because it lets us ask a harder question than who fired. What does a detective do when the crime is only the spark and the real force is the crowd, the state, and the appetite of a nation to remake itself? In that kind of storm, the neat solution, the satisfying culprit, the tidy arrest is rarely the truth. Sometimes the only victory is to see clearly, survive, and carry the facts out of the fire. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this darker kind of where the little gray cells meet something vast and political, leave your thoughts in the comments and tell us what corner of Europe and what moment of history you'd like our next mystery to haunt. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of Poirot and the Two Crowns. This time the crime was never just a question of who fired which shot. It was about letters, crowds, typewriters, and the terrible ease with which a country can be pushed from ceremony into rupture. Poirot can trace the lines and name the clerk behind the curtain. But even he can't stop a king who insists on being seen, and a crowd that's been carefully prepared to explode. In the epilogue, we touched on the real Lisbon regicide that inspired this story. And on the way, we've shifted dates and details to give Poirot and Hastings a front-row seat. If this darker, more political kind of case spoke to you, the detective dropped into the middle of history rather than tidying up after it, let us know in the comments, and tell us what other times and places you'd like us to haunt next. If you'd like to help keep these long mysteries coming, we do have a Patreon where we can dive deeper into this world, and a Buy Me a Coffee page if you prefer a one-off tip when a particular story hits home. All the links are in the description. For now, thank you again for staying with us to the last line. Until the next case, keep your eyes on the small details. Be wary of anyone who loves theater more than safety. And remember, it's not always the man with the gun who changes a country, but the man at the typewriter who tells him when to pull the trigger.